Hello friends, it is time once again to be doing a long overdue reading wrap up of the books I read in July and August. I'm going to be ranking these books again from the worst rated book I read to the highest rated book I read. There is a lot to talk about, so let's get right into the video. Starting off, I did quickly want to mention that I did have one DNF for this month, and that was Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I decided I wanted to DNF this after 50 pages because the unwanted pregnancy plotline, which is like the main plot of the book, is just a little too emotional for me at this time. I think I'm going to unhaul this soon. I don't anticipate coming back to reading it because if I do end up wanting to get interested in the story in the future, I'll probably just watch the adaptation on Apple TV. So this isn't really like a negative DNF, it's more just like not the book for me. I think it's really well written from what I did read of this book, and it's probably like a very interesting story if that's something that you can handle. But personally right now, it's just not something I'm able to emotionally put myself through. And at the same time, I don't think I should be forced to deal with things that trigger me just because I own the book and I want to say that I finished it. So yes, I'm going to happily pass this along to someone else that will enjoy the story more. I have to say overall, these last two reading months, nothing was particularly bad, but there were a couple things that were a little bit of a letdown. And the first on that list is Wrath Goddess Sing by Maya Dean. I ended up rating this 3 stars. The main reason why I ended up giving this just a 3-star rating and not anything higher was there were just a couple things that really irked me about the story. The first thing was that there were at least 3 plot threads that kind of went nowhere and seemed really inconsistent to what was established earlier on in the narrative of the book. I feel like I'm being a little intentionally vague here, but I don't really want to spoil anything for those who are still interested. Another thing is that I felt a lot of the characters were quite out of character. This is not really something that's that bad, it's just more of a personal thing for me. I find it that when I have an interpretation of characters being one way, even if it's done artistically, I'm usually not interested in deviations from that character interpretation. This does not impact, however, the trans interpretation of the characters in the story. That I really enjoyed. I really loved the interpretation of Briseis as a trans man and an Amazon. I also was perplexed, tone indicator positive, about this interpretation of this one biblical character as being trans. It was like, oh, why are you here? Oh, you're a trans woman? Cool. I'm just going to really go along for the ride with the rest of this plot thread. Overall, the themes of the book, I feel, focus mostly on motherhood and mother-child relationships. In this version of the story, one of the biggest changes is that Achilles is the child of Athena, and Achilles and Athena have quite a few discussions of how they can come to understand each other, because Achilles feels that Athena is really distant from her from the fact that 1, she's a god, and 2, she and all of the other gods just kind of see Achilles as a tool as opposed to a person with feelings and emotions. I don't want to say that there wasn't a lot of transphobia, but at the same time it definitely wasn't as much as I was expecting. And it did feel like everyone who talked down to Achilles in this way kind of got what was coming to them for being trash. I feel like in the end it felt really similar to how I felt about the death of Jane Lawrence. More that I just might be too dumb for this kind of more abstract ending. But I also think I was justified because some parts of the book that I did understand, I just felt that they didn't make a lot of sense or were kind of mishandled. The next book we are going to be talking about is Notes on an Execution by Danya Kakufka. I hope I'm saying her name right. I probably am not, but I apologize in advance for that. This book is incredibly popular on BookTube, so I figured I would pick it up because it seemed relatively interesting. It kind of has a lot of true crime tangents in it, and I'm very much interested in true crime. Overall, I feel like the themes are supposed to talk about the origins of serial killers and ideas of people being either fully good or fully evil, questioning if people that have killed others can be redeemed and made better, and overall issues of ideas of nurture versus nature, and if in alternative realities the same things would come to pass. All of these things are very interesting, and I think things that people that are interested in true crime have to grapple with and think about. What I disliked about this book was it felt like it was very surface level in the exploration of these themes, and it wasn't really very convincing of anything. I kind of felt that the author was getting at the idea that even if in another world Ansel had not been a serial killer, the focus shouldn't be on him being redeemed, but the fact that those women that he had killed would have been able to live out their lives, and just kind of overall the fact that we focus more on the serial killers as opposed to their victims. I don't know if this is just me as a true crime fan, but it felt very much like I've heard this story before, and a lot of the plot points and elements of Ansel's upbringing are not very unique. And if anything, it made me want to read a non-fiction story like The Stranger Beside Me or something else along those lines instead of this, because it felt like this story, if it had been non-fiction, would have had a lot more weight to it compared to it being a novel. The next book we're going to be talking about is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid as an author also needs no introduction. She's very popular on BookTube. Overall, this book talks about themes of addiction and its weight on relationships, both romantic, familial, and friendship-wise. I know, I'm reading another book that involves drug abuse, which I've said before is not something I like in books, and obviously I did not enjoy that aspect of it very much. Even though it's fictionalized, I think it tells a pretty authentic tale of what it was like to be in the music scene in the 1970s. But exactly for the same points I said on Notes of an Execution, I felt like maybe go read an actual biography of a group that was active during this time instead of this book. This book does, however, get me very excited for the live action adaptation that's going to be coming out. Because given the book is all about music and the music is fake, the TV show is going to have to create all of that music. So it'll be fun for them to have to recreate the songs and kind of bring the story to life. The next book we are going to be talking about is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, which kind of feels a little sacrilegious considering most people consider this one of the best YA fantasy books out there. This book accidentally took me 3 months to read, which I have no idea how that happened. I just started it when I was on vacation, and then it kind of got away from me, and I wasn't super gripped by the story to continue, and I had other books that I was more interested in finishing over this. And I think a big part of that was because I really disliked the main character. I am absolutely in IHateKazbrecker.com. His characterization for me is very much cool motive, still murder, in that just because he has a tragic backstory, he's kind of absolved from being a huge asshole. When at the same time, there's Inej, who was literally sold into sex slavery, and she's not an awful person. So I'm kind of like, Kaz, get it together. Jesper really is the only one that I like. I found that his personal struggle was the most interesting to me, although I was quite happy that I did not hate Nina and Matthias this time around. I really disliked their scenes in the live-action adaptation of Shadow and Bone. And overall, this is a personal thing, but I find that I often dislike characters that have the same name as me, so I dislike other iterations of characters named Nina, but I didn't dislike this Nina this time. Trying to analyze if there are actually themes in this book, I mean, it's a YA thriller heist novel, so it's not going to be super deep. I guess for some of the characters I liked, there was a bit of realizing that the world around you is much bigger than yourself and wanting to work to better it. Some of that comes from Matthias kind of realizing that he's been brainwashed with his military background and how dehumanizing the enemy allows militaries to be able to get away with really horrible shit. And spoilers here, but for Jasper's storyline, I think it was him realizing that even though he's tried to hide the fact that he's a Grisha and acting like he doesn't have any camaraderie with them, it's him realizing how much he needs to have that community and to help those who would come to him for aid because he just can't stay silent about it any longer. Overall, I give this a 3.5 because I did like aspects of the story and I am compelled to probably pick up the second one. Although overall, I do really feel that Leigh Bardugo's writing just maybe isn't for me. I have previously DNF'd a different Leigh Bardugo book, so I just don't know in the long run if I'm really interested in a lot of her series. I want to pick up this one because I did have a lot of interest in the characters from watching the Shadow and Bone TV show, but I think going forward I probably will only consume it as the Netflix show. Okay, the next book we're going to be talking about is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This book I read in a reading vlog and I ended up giving 4 stars to it. The variation of the different perspectives in this book kind of worked both positively and negatively for the story. Since on one hand we are always getting something that is fresh and interesting, but it can also hurt the overall narrative structure because we might only see a character for 1 or 2 POV chapters and then they're completely gone. Talking about themes, the main one is the impact of war on women. I said in the vlog I read this, but there's actually a lot less of a focus on sexual violence than I had anticipated, and much more on the sense of familial loss of male relatives, being children, brothers, husbands. I think the tone of the ending is similar to it is in The Silence of the Girls and being one of hope, and kind of this reassurance that the Trojan way of life is going to be carried on through the sons from the Trojan women. The next books we are going to be talking about is volumes 1 and 2 of the Scum Villain Self-Saving System. I read the second one of these for a reading vlog, the same one where I read 1,000 Ships. Overall, I'm really enjoying this series. I hopefully can read the 3rd volume before the end of the year, especially because the 4th volume, which is the short story collection, comes out on my birthday. To kind of sum up the themes of these works, I guess it's more like tropes, but a big one is about miscommunication and kind of expectations of the other person in a relationship. Chingchou basically causes all of his own problems because he's operating under a false sense of expectations of what Binghe thinks of him and how he's going to act. And if he legit just kind of spoke from the heart, he wouldn't be in half of the trouble that he's in. So far, I've rated both of these 4 stars. I think the reason why this hasn't crept into any higher of a rating than that is because I do find those 2 tropes to be a little bit grating. And it's really kind of infuriating to me when a main character doesn't really speak their mind, and Chingchou again is known for doing that over and over again. And I think that miscommunication trope has kind of gotten in the way of me really enjoying some of the more, I guess, fan servicey moments. I did find it a little cute in the first volume when Qingqiu kind of is inadvertently causing Binghe to be jealous. But by the second volume, when Binghe has a lot more power in the relationship, it just feels a little bit weird. But at the same time, I'm interested in seeing how their relationship will develop and where the third and final volume goes. Switching now to a different Danmei, I wanted to talk about the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. So far, I've only read one volume of this, and I gave it a 4.5 stars. This book also has the main themes of being miscommunication and this expectations of a relationship, but in a different way than it is in Scumville and Self-Saving System. The biggest thing is that Wei Wuxian really just never shuts up. But he does also think that Wan Ji hates him, and in truth, a lot of what happened when they were young, it's kind of like a valid assumption for him thinking that. But in the present timeline, it's like, boy, Wan Ji is so into you. He's so whipped, but in a still very stoic, man of few words type of way. But at the same time, I'm like, Wuxian, a little reflection would save you so much trouble. So far, aspects of that dynamic have not really been grating at me the same way they have been in Scumville and Self-Saving System. I also feel like the fact that Wan Ji is less openly hostile is helpful in me not seeing the miscommunication as that big of an issue. Because at the same time, he is projecting out a more positive and kind energy towards Wuxian, even though Wuxian is kind of interpreting a lot of his actions as just him being friendly. But I'm hoping over time that they'll both be able to become more candid with their feelings for each other. Even though I find Qingqiu in Scumville and Self-Saving System to be pretty funny, I feel like Wuxian is just a lot more of my type of character. He's really flamboyant and really loud and really just does whatever he wants and doesn't care about other people's opinions of him. And then Wan Ji, on the other hand, is very much the moe through seriousness type of trope. So together they form two halves of a power couple of tropes that I really enjoy. So that is a wrap up of the books that I read in July and August. I'm going to try and get these more out in a timely fashion with each month going forward, but I want to quickly wrap up all of the backlogged books I've read. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments down below. Consider liking this video or subscribing if you aren't already. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!